It is I, once again, your friendly Invisible Sun game master, Jordan from Sortilege. And we are continuing the second season of my Invisible Sun campaign on Coup with our second group session, Atrocity Exhibition. And we had another full group, and we started off with the last Invisible Sun card that we had in our previous session was the Ghostly Presence. And so there's a little bit of things from our characters' past may come back to haunt them. We started off a couple weeks after the previous session in the cathedral that was previously a temple to the Kaleidoscope Void that Rhea and Ward are currently living in. And Rhea, as you may recall, is our weaver, and Ward is our ghost maker. And so Rhea, from her side session, she goes out and shows Ward the sigil that's been painted on the exterior wall of the cathedral. And Ward's getting a sinking feeling and is starting to feel like there's maybe something he should know about this. And there is, because when Ward took on the Herald's Plagues forte, I wasn't sure what the plague would be yet, but these sigils are a symptom of it. And they hadn't noticed it before. Rhea then also takes Ward upstairs and shows him the stained glass window that you can just walk through, and there's a whole little storage space inside of it. And in there is the orb that Aberrancula left behind. They try to open it, and Rhea makes a weave to let the mystery escape. And the weave doesn't get it open, but it does get it to start kind of glow and pulse. It's around then that Marwig shows up with a fruit basket and then realizes how unhelpful that is for Ward. But he comes in, and he comes to Ward, and he wants to tell what he's done, because Marwig's character arc right now is aid a friend, and he sees that as helping Ward regain a body. And I gave Marwig a whole list of spells and rituals and other kinds of magical practices that could potentially be used. And they kind of walk down the pros and cons of them, with the best solution being a ritual that is going to take some effort to pull together. There's another option that is short-term but requires a flayed corpse for Ward to inhabit. They end up aiming for one that's only going to work for a day, but doesn't have quite as grisly of a requirement, and can be done as a ritual in about a half an hour. So they're having that conversation. Then we skip ahead about a week, and now we're back at the Deja Brew Cafe where Hada works, and Lumina is here. She's the other weaver from the Covenant of Wittershins, and she's here for the gossip. Hada is talking about how the bartender Spectacles came by, and how they're going to meet up soon and learn how to distill some really strong emotions. And he sees Hada at the table where he had previously seated Spectacles, and tries to see if she notices the sigil that was there, because Spectacles didn't seem to, but Hada noticed it and didn't really understand what it was. And here's where things kind of caught me a little bit off guard, because Lumina and Hada, because they were fellow students, they actually have a shared spell that they know that they can cast when they're near each other. And the spell that they have is Heriolation, which allows for them to see a little bit into the future. And Lumina cast it, and she did she succeeded very, very well. And we also pulled a whole combo of cards. We pulled the Alchemist on the Green Sun, followed by the Cat, followed by the Ambassador, followed by Enticing Jewel, because the Alchemist triggers a new card to be pulled. The Cat copies the previous thing, so it pulls another card. The Ambassador triggers another card to be pulled. So this was all from a single card pull to see what she saw. So I interpreted this as just like an absolutely stellar success. And so I gave her 2 visions. The first one had to do with a mouthless being that was kind of projecting its voice, and his enemies all, ended up putting down their weapons and bowing to him. The second vision, however, had to do with the sigil, And it was really this terror of like this was connecting to some ferocious predator, this like transdimensional being, of which this was like seeing just a little slice of it, coming from the future, coming for them, or coming for the present. And she falls to the ground in horror, is babbling incoherently, trying to describe in language this uncommunicable vision. And they try to figure out, what the deal is there. In the meantime, we have some more visitors to the cafe. It's the meeting that Rhea had scheduled, where Aberynkhila shows up with the two guests that he wanted to introduce to her. And she shows up shortly thereafter. And you have Aberynkhila, who's, shaved head, kind of a white skin, something of like a more formal attire. Second character is kind of glowing from the lower portion of the face all the way down into the chest, and they're wearing a long coat. And then there's an angel that looks kind of like a collection of soap bubbles. It's about the size of a beach ball, kind of floating around, and just has that very rainbow radiance to it. So, Rhea comes in, she says hello to Lumina. They want to talk a little bit later, but she sits down. Aberynkhila introduces his friends, Jakuto and Metatron. Metatron is the angel. And she remembers that Jakuto was in the Obverse Herald, and that they issued a correction that usually the Obverse Herald is saying the opposite of the truth, but this time they inadvertently said the truth when they said that Jakuto was returning to Saturnine. And so Metatron speaks for itself and for Jakuto with this kind of like washed out reverb voice. And they explained that they were doing magical archaeology in the Gold Sun, and that they believe that they found part of the spell that was cast to form the actuality. And they're basically in Indigo in order to verify the finding, but they were actually able to bring it with them. They're able to bring one of these words of creation. And Rhea doesn't confront Aberynkhila yet, but asks to meet him privately, and he agrees to come by, but after they take care of some other things. So it'll probably be a week or so. So with all that, Marwig is kind of walking through the neighborhood, and he notices this really striking art piece, these many faces that are kind of coming right out of the wall, these evocative masks, and they seem familiar, maybe from a collection that he'd seen before. He sees Rhea at the cafe, comes over and steps inside. Meanwhile, Rhea reaches out to Lumina, and Lumina asks about the sigil, and she and Rhea start talking about it, but Marwig actually can't see it. Hada comes over here as well, and Rhea mentions that that this showed up at her cathedral about a week prior, around the same time that Hada noticed it. Hada reiterates his experience at the Vancian Library, and she mentions that the sigil showed up at the cathedral around the time that Aberynkhila came to visit, and Marwig gets really concerned by this, because this is the first time that Rhea has really mentioned that she's been in touch with Aberynkhila, and she tries to dismiss it. So she offers to bring people around to the cathedral, and so they all decide to go at the end of Hada's shift. Meanwhile, Hada is asking what happened to Tosin, who the Thaw took last time, and Marwig is able to relay that Tosin was missing for a good week, and then came back seemingly none the worse for wear, but was shaken and has refused to speak about what happened, and has refused to return to Gatesmith for work. So they pass by the masks on the way back to Rhea's. Back at the cathedral, as they arrive, everyone sees the sigil painted on the exterior. Lumina's shocked. Rhea kind of rushes people in. And Lumina then shares what she had learned when she cast the spell, like what she experienced. Hada recognizes that Rhea is keeping like baby emotion leaf plants there. Rhea defends herself to Marwig that she hasn't spent that much time with Aberynkhila, and after all, they really only have Gertrude's hearsay to link him to Asclepius, the person who was seemingly stripped of their name and status from the Goetics. When they mentioned the coming from the gold sun and the whole word of creation thing, Marwig says that he hasn't studied the legacy at all. So then Marwig's going to try to research the sigil a bit. He offers to go to the Hall of Records and bring Lumina with, since she's the one who had the really vivid experience. But before they go, Rhea brings him upstairs to see the orb, and the pulsing is much stronger now. And Marwig checks, make sure that the orb isn't a living thing. Lumina casts Hariolation again, and this time she doesn't see anything related to the orb, but she's seeing her neighbor Woodrup get visited by a couple of thugs, and they have an animated discussion, go into the house, and then the two thugs come back out. So she comes out of that vision, none the wiser for the orb, but it's like, oh, I think my neighbor's in trouble. So Rhea then ends up using a wicked key to open the orb, and the orb, kind of opens up a little bit, and this little blue tendril kind of comes out, hovers for a moment, and then just dives straight into Lumina's forehead. And Lumina has this vision where, as a child, she saw her Aunt Caroline sneaking away one night, and she followed her all through this part of the city and down into this underground tunnel system, and into, sees her aunt go through this door that requires like a secret knock and passage. But she's able to climb up on the exterior and see into the room, and she's seeing this ritual that she doesn't understand. She uses her no mind forte ability on her aunt and is able to hear this number that she's meditating on, 707. And then her aunt notices her thoughts and basically, reverses it, pushes the thought into Lumina's mind to return home and to go into what, in hindsight, would be a designated place with some kind of spell that was prepped to strip your memory. And so this forgotten thought, this memory of Lumina's, was taken away when she went back to that place. So this was apparently the memory that Mara, the Warden of Blue, had tasked Rhea to find and return to its rightful owner. And so this completes that task of hers. Let's see here. Before they leave, Rhea suddenly realizes that the faces at the exhibit that they saw were the faces of Celeste, who's a high-ranking weaver that they met way at the beginning of the original campaign. Celeste set her up with her current weaver cell, but hasn't been really directly involved in their lives. But they decided to split up. So Marwig and Lumina will go to the Hall of Records to look into this whole sigil time worm thing. And Hadda and Ward will return with Rhea to see about Celeste. So in the Hall of Records, this is Lumina's first time. It's pretty imposing, but Marwig just gets them a study room and works with the librarian. And, with the help of, Lumina's got an eye for detail. So she catches a reference to the sigil. And then on the basis of that, Marwig's research skills are really able to dig into it well. And so they figure out that the sigil has historically been associated with the enemy that was defeated in the war, and with the Angular Serpentine, which is an entity that they can't find a ton about. So he's going to kind of continue with that. Marwig had a bit of a hypothesis that it was associated with the dark and the demons there, but they can't find anything to support that hypothesis. Meanwhile, Rhea, Hadda, and Ward go back to the streets outside of Gavura House, the Fraternity, near the cafe. And Rhea sees her acquaintance Cusha from the Calmera Sodality observing the exhibit. And Cusha is really impressed. She's like, do you know who the artist is for this? Usually, these neighborhood pop-ups are so gauche. She goes into this full art critic mode. While they're talking, Cambria, one of the Fraternity students, the Vances, comes up to Hatta and says, "Do you know where the gerund is? We think we found a body." And so Hatta rushes over to the gerund. And the gerund of Arca, we came up with this idea during the session 0 that the gerund is really well-intentioned, but she always gets things just ever so slightly wrong with like some important detail. So Hatta heads over and explains that a body is found. The gerund, her name is Taki, is immediately serious, promises to make calls right away. Hatta talks to one other person in the office to try to, error correct. And then, comes back, asks Cambria to take him to the body, which is in the back alley. The head is completely smooth and nondescript, and the clothes don't seem to be distinct from the actual body. And Hatta is a little unclear as to could this be like a simulacra of some kind? But Cambria is pretty sure that maybe they've been to a changery, but I'm pretty sure that this is an actual person. The other thing we came up with during session 0 was something of a bicycle gang that was conscription based, kind of like jury duty. Anybody in the neighborhood might get called on to become part of this gang, which was colloquially known as the Filth. And so 2 of the Filth, Nell and Temujin, both of whom are just absolute bruisers of men, come up and they come up to Rhea and they're like, "We're here to investigate a body." And Rhea and Ward are kind of confused and trying to figure out what's going on. Hatta's trying to figure out if the Thaw would show up or should he call them. But the Thaw don't really get called. They just kind of show up. And there isn't really a way to predict where or how to do it. And eventually everybody finds each other. Temujin just comes up and picks up the body and hoists it over his shoulder. And Rhea and Hatta are just aghast. And Rhea recognizes that it is in fact Celeste. And she asks where they're going to take the body, and they're just kind of shrugged. They're like, "We're going to throw it in the river." So Rhea convinces them to bring the body to the cathedral, puts it in the secret room. Ward and Hatta kind of jerry-rig a refrigeration device. And then on their way back, Rhea apologizes and says goodbye to Cusha. And Cusha is like, "I would love to see more of their work. Let me know if you ever find out the artist," which is a little unnerving to Rhea. So yeah, the session ended with them depositing the body at the cathedral and Rhea sending an urgent message to Indra, who is the leader of her Weaver cell. And the other cool thing, which I will create a little screen share here real quick. Quite pleased with. Can't quite zoom in, but this is how I'm doing the session notes organization in Notion now. So I'm able to do a simple NPC gallery. So here we have Aberincula, Aunt Caroline, Cambria, Celeste, Yakuto, Metatron, Nell, Cusha, Taki, and Temujin. And then kind of broken down by calendar days. So Laxandy's Juniper the 25th is our first scene. And then the rest of them all take place on Calistes. And then right at the bottom, I have an XP log for all the XP the players earned. So finding new ways to make this work a little bit more efficiently and be able to track all the different spinning plates. So we're already diving deep into side scenes between now and our next session, but that should catch you up on our plot so far. Thank you for sticking around.